everybody. Welcome back to the Full Armor of God podcast. I'm your host today, Father Don Purdom. So I want to talk a lot about today leadership. Matter of fact, leadership's something that's really been on my mind of late. I have a very dear friend who is a leader in an organization, and that organization has been undergoing some trials and some challenges, and he's been leading his organization through that, and I've had the privilege of talking with him about some of the things that he's been going through. And it's kind of reinvigorated the whole idea about what leadership is and what leadership isn't for me. I have been really blessed in the area of leadership over my years, both in the military and in the church and in business. Quite frankly, I've come across some of the greatest leaders in the world and had the opportunity to sit and learn under numerous leaders that have greatly influenced and shaped me. Some men like Professor Howard Hendricks at Dallas Theological Seminary, kind of known as a leadership guru during his heyday at the seminary, and very profound leader himself in terms of how he mentored people outside of the church, business leaders, government leaders, and etc., to help them formulate and grow as leaders themselves. And of course, in the military, as a military chaplain, I came to know some incredible people in leadership. Some of them were generals, others were colonels. As an enlisted man in the Navy, my division officers were instrumental in teaching me leadership and giving me the opportunity to pursue leadership at different levels within the Navy, and during that process being mentored by a full bird captain and a commander and a command master chief. You know, my wife and I came across a guy that I had fallen in love with back in that time in the early 1990s, Master Chief Blaney. And this guy was just phenomenal. He took me under his wings. Here I am in E3, just a seaman in the Navy, and he took me under his wings, and I don't know why I had favor with him. I look back on those days and I see how God used some incredible officers in my life for this young guy that mentored me and helped me apply for officer programs and do some amazing things that a lot of young sailors don't get the opportunity to do, because I was ambitious and I had a dream and I wasn't shy about sharing what that was. And here I am. I don't really have any leadership skills, but I'm learning them from some pretty incredible people. And so in business, I have the same experience again. I've learned from some incredible people, some business principles. And then in Dallas Seminary, sitting under some, again, all right, so I'm going on and I'm bloviating, right? You don't care about all of this. But the point I'm trying to make is that we're sitting at a moment in time in history, and I'm looking across the wide spectrum of things, and I'm wondering, where are the Christian leaders? Where are they? I'm not saying that they're not there. They're always there. But what I am questioning is that in my own journeys, I'm seeing fewer and fewer people who have leadership skills that are sitting on the sidelines and they're doing absolutely nothing. Now, sometimes we can justify that and say, I have a lot of good reason for that. I'm stressed out, I'm put out, I'm overworked, I'm underappreciated, I'm this, I'm that. And we kind of get caught into our own doldrums, and it happens to us all. But we're sitting on the sidelines and we're wondering, all right, why am I unfulfilled? Why does it seem like things around me are not going right anywhere in my life? Things are a struggle at work. They're a struggle in church. They're a struggle at home. They're a struggle in relationships and friendships, and everything is in constant chaos around me. Well, there's always been constant chaos. That's been true since the dawn of time. You're not unique to that, nor am I. I've been through my own struggles with all of those issues happening at one time in my life. And there are answers to that, and there are opportunities that lie within those answers to begin to grow and exert leadership. So today, I want to announce that I'm going to start the Faith and Trust Center for Leadership. There are Christians out there in all walks of life. They're pastors, they're church leaders, there's business leaders, they're nonprofit leaders. Maybe you're a government leader of some kind, or you're in the military. Whatever the case may be, as a Christian, how do we grow and exert leadership and influence to those around us in ways that contribute positively to other people's lives? Because we got to really get a handle on what is leadership. And for decades, I went through all of this idea and training about leadership is influence and ... And I'm not saying that's not true. It is. But there's so much more to leadership than just influence. Because there's something that gives us the right to influence within our leadership. How are we living our lives? What are we doing? What are we saying? So today, let's kind of dive in and let's talk about leadership. Let's talk about the 7 points of leadership that are crucial. And let's tell a few stories about where we've kind of seen this exhibited in different facets of life. So leaders, what are these 7 points? Well, the first point to a leader is continually learning. But learning what? This is what's instrumental. What are they learning? So they're learning to hone their craft, obviously. They're constantly reading, they're absorbing, they're gathering new information, they're considering how others are innovating and what others are doing, and they're constantly thinking through ideas and learning about their own organizations or their own institutions. We'll call it. Those can be personal institutions. They can be corporate institutions. They can be government institutions. Whatever they are, they're always in the process of learning. Okay? They do a lot of reading, a lot of researching. They do a lot of consulting. And they're always around other leaders that are teaching them new things, and they're also teaching other leaders new things. So that's the first point. A leader is always learning. Second, a leader is always listening and observing everything going on around them. This is vital. You know, I can remember as a young man, people taking me aside and saying, "Don, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that's for a reason." Right? But what we often forget is we also have 2 eyes. So are we listening? Are we watching everything going on around us? Are we observing the trends and all of the things that are going on in people's lives? And through that, through listening, observing, that leads us to number 3. If we're learning, we're listening and observing, are we discerning? See, discernment happens when you bring all of that together. When you bring all the things that you're learning together, along with what you're listening and observing to the things going on around you or the things going on in the world, you're beginning to discern patterns. You're discerning all of the dynamics that are going on, and that begins to help influence you, right? So what's happening in the culture? What's going on broadly? You know, we can talk about all of the dynamics going on today. There's so many things happening. Things in the political sphere between the political left, the political right, the center that's trying to gravitate both of those back to the middle. Good luck. But, right? So what is happening within those rooms? What are the other cultural things happening? How are there shifts and movements and trends that are happening within the sphere of influence that you have within your leadership? It's because all of these things that are happening out there in the world, they're going to shape and inform what's happening inside your institution. Again, I want to emphasize, we're going to talk about this, what are these institutions in a few minutes, but there are personal institutions, and then there are corporate institutions, governmental institutions, nonprofit institutions, etc. Right? Whatever's happening out there is going to filter its way into what's happening inside your organization. Can you, from your learning, listening, and observing, can you discern what's happening within your realms of influence or your spheres of influence? See, those things are all going to impact what's happening within your group. And as you're discerning what's happening, that leads us to the 4th point of great leaders, right? They act decisively. So you're learning, you're listening and observing, you're discerning, and now you're being able to act decisively to all of the things that are going on around you. And as you're acting decisively to those things, you may be doing what some call issues management. You're being able to discern things that are coming down the road and put things in place now to head that off, to head a problem off, or to head a crisis off before it becomes a significant issue. Right. So you can act decisively because you're discerning what's going on around you. You're discerning what a decision is or what a cultural issue is impacting your team or your organization or your employees, or how it's impacting your church and how it's impacting your faith, how it's impacting your family, etc. Then the fifth point is that you're reviewing and you're revising. Right? So you've now acted based on what you've discerned, learned and observed, and learned. And you're now being able to review and revise what's working, what's not working, why isn't it working, how do you need to tweak it. And then sixth, folks, I can't stress this one enough. This is probably the most important thing of all of them, and yet it's probably also the biggest weakness amongst people who are leaders. And folks, I'm going to tell you later, I'm going to remind you later, we are all leaders in some way, shape, form, or manner. You are a leader. Somewhere in your life, you are a leader. So, are you willing to admit your mistakes? Great leaders, when they go through their review process, they identify their own weaknesses. Where did the mistake go wrong? Where did a bad decision go wrong? Where did a good decision that had unintended consequences come into play? What role did you have in that? What limitations or lack of information did you have? What limitations in your emotional intelligence did you have? What limitations in your own leadership that needed to grow? Where was it at? And then the seventh point is you repeat the process over. You go right back into the continually learning part, right? You have been learning all along because you're a continual learner. But now you're taking in your review process, in your revising process, in your admitting your mistakes process, and you go back to your mentors and to the people that are other leaders, and you can put it on the table and say with humility, okay, this is what happened. This is where I understand it. Now I'm not sure where to go from here. What needs to happen? What mistakes have you made in the past and corrected them that I can learn from? So I want to go back into point one, continually learning. It's not just reading. It's not just meeting with your team. It's also having mentors. And how are those mentors helping you see the gaps that you're missing? We're going to see all of this in a story in just a minute. Folks, the bottom line when it comes to leadership, though, is that society is always in fits and starts. And we are going through fits and starts right now like maybe we haven't seen in the history of our country. There's so much happening right now. There's so much happening in politics. There's so much happening in societal transformations. There's so much happening in government. That has nothing to do with politics necessarily. There's a lot going on around the world where we're seeing economic issues and wars, and those are affecting corporations, and then societal transformations in terms of, we could talk about DEI. We could talk about all of the social fabric that's changing in terms of the morality around us. All of these things are influencing us and causing fits and starts. And the question I come back to is, where are the leaders? Because at the core, a leader is a risk taker. But a leader understands the risk and looks to build coalitions, and within those coalitions, build unity and then spread that unity out through solid and reasonable arguments. Arguments that are rational, and arguments because we care, not arguments because we're seeking to pick fights. Just because you're a good debater and you're good at picking fights does not make you a leader. Matter of fact, it might demonstrate that you haven't thought about those 7 phases of leadership above and you're stuck. You might be able to act decisively, but you haven't discerned the environment properly. You haven't listened and observed to what's going on. You don't understand. Let me give you a great example. This is really, and I've got a book coming in the mail today I can't wait to read about the emergence of the de-church, right? Those people that have quit going to church. I think I read somewhere or just saw in the last few days, in the past 2 or so years, 2 to 3 years, over 15 million people have just stopped going to church. There's a reason for that. And I contend that a lot of it has to do with our lack of leadership within the church. Because what leadership should do is hone our character, and our character creates integrity, and integrity creates followers. Now, granted, we're always going to have opposition, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, because we're not going to unite everyone. Great leaders just simply cannot unite everyone, but the goal is, can they unite the plurality? And can they do it in such a way that those who oppose us still respect us? Respect doesn't mean they like us. Respect doesn't mean they agree with us, but it does mean that they understand us and where we're coming from, and that there are ways that they can meet us in the middle. Leaders, they have to practice leadership. Many of us are practicing cowardship. We're not exhibiting bravery. We're shrinking back, and we're trying to build coalitions of people that will agree with us so that we feel comfortable. But that's not being a leader. Leadership isn't perfect. We're going to make a lot of mistakes. That's the nature of leadership sometimes. The greatest leaders make the greatest mistakes. You see this in the military. We saw this in World War II. We saw this with Ike and MacArthur and Patton. They made mistakes. They weren't always perfect. But I will tell you this, even in business, the greatest leaders push boundaries. And when they push boundaries, they create problems. Almost universally, they're going to create a problem. That's what great leaders do. They solve problems, but in solving them, they also create them. Because when you create problems, you go back to that 7-part process I mentioned a minute ago. And here's the truth about leaders. Every single leader. Abraham Lincoln, he's one of the greatest studied leaders of all time for this very reason, because he went through that 7-point process continually in his evolution as a president, and his learning how to deal with the crisis that was at hand and eliminate that crisis. Change as a leader only happens through a challenging time, and that's the bottom line. If you're not willing to face a challenging time, then you're never going to push through the boundary to become the next stage in your leadership development. You're never going to get there. Leaders only grow during challenges. They only grow during a crisis of some kind. Leaders, they just don't suddenly become great leaders out of nowhere. They were purified. The Bible talks, and the Apostle Paul talks about being, refined as gold. And if you ever look through that process of purifying gold, what an incredible process. There's a lot of heat and pressure that's applied in purifying or taking impurities out of gold. Leaders understand that that skills to become leaders are learned, and they're honed through adversity over time. Let's talk about a great leader in the Bible. Someone who never thought he would attain one of the greatest leadership roles in all of the world's history. That's Moses. I'm not going to tell the whole Bible story. So for those of you out there who are academic or scholars or just Bible studiers, I don't want you to go through and nitpick what I'm about to say, because I'm going to give a very broad overview. Moses is he's a Hebrew that is delivered into the household of Pharaoh. He becomes royalty. He's given the greatest education of anybody in that time of the world. And when he grows into that as a young man, he begins to understand something's not right, the way that these Hebrew slaves are being treated. and he kills a man, an Egyptian who is overexerting his leadership by being abusive. And that abusiveness, there's something soft about Moses' heart that he hates what he's seeing without fully understanding what's going on around him. And he kills a man, and he has to flee. And he ends up in the desert for 40 years, marries into an incredible family, and he's a shepherd. He goes from nobility and royalty to probably the least respected profession in the world, the lowliest of all things. And he's in the desert, shepherding sheep and the filth and the dirtiness. But he meets a woman, and he meets a family, and he finds favor with them, and he falls in love, and he has children. And he exerts a different kind of leadership within his community. And God is teaching him valuable lessons during his time in the desert. So one of the principles I want to teach you about leadership is that if you didn't spend time in the desert, if you didn't spend time questioning and going through and wondering, why is this happening? Why is this so painful? I went from being this to becoming that. Then you're not preparing yourself. You're not continually learning. And after 40 years, when God shows up on the top of Mount Sinai at the fiery bush, now Moses, he gives all the reasons in the world why he can't do what God wants him to do. He's in fear. Great leaders aren't without fear. But God mentored him through it, and he gave what Moses needed so that Moses could be an effective leader. And we all know the story about the 3 plagues and leading them out of Egypt. And then we go right back into the desert again. Moses, out of fear, God brings him back to Mount Sinai with all of Israel, with all of these Hebrews, who knows how many tens of thousands of people. And he goes right back to Mount Sinai again, where God will give him the 10 commandments. But now Moses has to learn how to lead, but Moses has got a problem. Moses doesn't deal well with his anger. And he's leading all of these people, and he's frustrated with them. And they're coming to him day after day with all these problems. And finally, Moses' father-in-law says, Moses, you can't do this anymore. He has a mentor. You can't do this. You can't be all things to all people. You have a role to play as the leader. Where are all the leaders below you that you're mentoring and you're bringing up? Why aren't you empowering them to lead? Why aren't you empowering people to judge so that they can know how to help people solve their problems amongst each other? Moses, you can't do this. You need to raise up a new generation of leaders. And then there's a pivotal moment out of Moses' anger when he breaks the 10 commandments, that God comes to him and says, because of your anger, you're never going to see the land that's promised. Now, Moses is one of a couple of the most pivotal leaders in Israel's history. There's Abraham, and of course, some might put Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob together. Perfectly reasonable to do. There's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but there's Abraham, because the Abrahamic covenant, the promise is to Abraham and to Abraham's descendants. And then you have Moses, and then you have David. And some might even throw Elijah in with that. So there's 4 leaders in 2,000 or so years of history. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, David, and we'll keep Elisha in there because he's kind of a questionable figure in the New Testament. All right, Moses, not a perfect man, but he's constantly going through these 7 stages, and he's got mentors in that first stage where he keeps coming back to that guide him and help him. Who are the mentors in your life? Now, another day, I'm going to tell the story of Southwest Airlines in its first decade, because most people don't realize that for the first decade of Southwest Airlines, they didn't even fly an airplane as a corporation. Not a single one. And we're going to talk about the leadership that was exerted by Herb Keller that navigated some tremendous waters and challenging times that made him the leader that he would become. But through all of that was faith, right? So here's the question for you. If you're a leader, and again, we're going to get back to in just a second defining who leaders are. If you're a leader, and you're a leader, I guarantee you, do you have the fortitude, the will, the strength, and the faith to see your purpose through? Moses, he didn't always have it. He struggled, but it was there. God helped him, and he had the faith to push through. Now, what kind of leaders are there? Let's talk about this for just a few brief minutes before we close. This is vitally, vitally important. I've been teasing this all along up to this point, right? So if you are a leader, what kind of leaders are there? Well, we know in the church there are pastors, right? But pastors aren't the only leaders, are they? There are Sunday school teachers. A greeter. A greeter is a leader. You committed to doing something that you're going to see through every Sunday, right? A greeter. There are small group leaders. There are prayer group leaders. There's people that just lead by example. They're not in a formal leadership, but you know what? They indirectly mentor people all day long. And I want you to know this has nothing to do with age. Folks, matter of fact, one of my biggest complaints, I'm really weary of hearing people talk about it's time to give things over to the next generation. Folks, the next generation doesn't always know what they're doing. They need to be mentored. You need someone who is seasoned to mentor you, to give you advice, to help you lead. Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater in this, right? How many of us are neglecting our 70-somethings, our 80-somethings, our 90-somethings-year-old folks? We're neglecting them. We're just throwing them to the side, and they've got the belief that they need to turn over their leadership to the next generation, and I'm going to call hogwash on that. Stop that nonsense out there. These people have grown in wisdom and stature. Do you think that King Solomon could have learned his lessons if he had just said, well, I sinned, I made mistakes, I'm done, I'm over, I'm gone, I'm walking away, put me out to the pasture? What about King David? King David died as a king on the throne. Solomon died as a king on the throne. These were wise, elderly men whom life had taught them lessons that those that were younger than them could not have learned. Let's not forget our elders. They are still leaders. They have something to contribute. They have something to give. Don't just call them old people and throw them aside. And those of you who might be in that position, stand up. Start leading again. All right. What about in the home? If you're a spouse, you're a leader. You are co-leading one another in your home. You are making decisions about the direction of your family every single day. How will you spend your money? How and when are you going to pray? What about going to church faithfully? And where will you go to church? How will the decisions that you impact your faith and your spouse? Folks, that's leadership. If you're a parent, you're leading your child. Paul talks about this, right? Parents, don't lead your children and rebuke them into anger. Right? We don't want our children to grow in anger. We want them to grow in love and wisdom and stature, and there's a way to lead them through discipline and still do that without provoking them into hate. That's leadership. What about in business? Whether you're an owner or an entrepreneur, whether you're in management or a supervisor, maybe you're a low-level person working yourself up through your company or your organization, you're still being given an opportunity to demonstrate leadership. What about in government? I'm not even talking about our president and senators and congressmen and governors and state legislators. But what about the people at the bottom of government? Those running your townships and your counties, the people that are employees of the government that make the day-to-day functions of the government work. Where is their leadership? And where is their leadership as Christians? Today, we're being told that it is not a favorable thing to be a Christian in the workplace, to be a Christian in government. but yet we can have all of this horrible, ungodly, evil stuff happening, and that is okay? It's not. There is a way to exhibit leadership and navigate those waters with courage and bravery. Where are the people out there doing that? Folks, what I want us to see is we're all leaders. Yet the overwhelming majority of us are abdicating our leadership to authorities in our lives that are not healthy leaders for us. They will not lead us towards God. They will lead us further from Him. They will not lead us towards holiness. They will take us further away from it. They will not lead us towards the principles of Judaic Christian ethics, biblical ethics that tell us to do the right thing. And how many of us are caught up in lying and stealing and deceiving people and getting caught in all kinds of practices that are not just unethical, but they're sinful to their core. Folks, great leaders rise above these things. It's time for you to become a great leader, right where you're at. Become a great leader in your home. Become a great leader where you work. Become a great leader as a business owner or an entrepreneur. Become a great leader as a pastor or as a Sunday school teacher or a greeter. Become a great leader within your family. Doesn't matter where you're at today. It matters how you understand where you've been and where you're going. Again, back to those 7 points. Are you learning? Are you continually learning? Do you have mentors? Are you a mentor? Are you a mentoree? Are you listening and observing to all that's going on around you? Are you discerning what's happening in the culture broadly and how that's impacting your institution, meaning your family, your place of worship, your business, or where you work, how it's impacting your government, etc.? Are you acting decisively based on that discernment, listening and observing, and continually learning? Are you continually in a place of reviewing what's happening and what's working and revising? And when you're reviewing and you're revising, are you considering yourself as a leader? How are you growing as a leader? Are you admitting your mistakes? Are you acknowledging your mistakes? Are you seeking to overcome those mistakes so that in the future, the mistakes you make won't be the same mistakes. They'll be different ones. And then are you repeating that process over? All right, folks. Again, I'm going to be giving more information here in the very near future about the Faith and Trust Center for Leadership. I hope you're going to come alongside us, join us. Let's get into leading and let's get into mentoring one another. Let's get into growing as leaders together. If you're interested in that, then message me on Facebook. You can find me at Don Purdom on Facebook. Private message me. Tell me you're interested. You want to learn more about the Faith and Trust Center for Leadership. You want to grow in it. I'm going to put some on the Facebook post. I will put an opportunity for people to tell me that they're interested there. Or again, you can just private message me. But whatever you do, if you're ready to grow in your leadership, then let's get growing together. This is going to be a process for me of going through these 7 processes. Again, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to be transparent about those mistakes. I'm going to make procedural mistakes. I'm going to have other flaws. I'm open to you telling me what those are. But in doing so, I hope your criticism comes from a place of wanting to help improve things, improve myself, improve yourself, not to just be a critic because it feels good to blast someone. All right? There we go. That's it. Thank you so much for listening in today, everyone. God bless you, and I hope that you have an incredible couple of days. I'll be back again on Tuesday with the next podcast of the Full Armor